Vermont PBS presents the Governor's Press Conference. Governor Peter Shumlin meets the media to address issues of importance in Vermont.
Thank you all for joining us. And today is National Equal Pay Day. And we all know that Vermont and the nation continue to carry a pay disparity between men and women that's unacceptable in America and unacceptable in Vermont. And I want to thank the Vermont Commission on Women, and we'll be hearing from a number of employers that support not only Equal Pay Day, but solving this problem. What's the problem? The problem is that, according to the Department of Labor, in America, women earn 78 cents for every dollar that a man earns. In Vermont, with the Commission on Women's numbers, women earn 83 cents for every dollar that a man makes. We all know that pay inequity based on gender is not acceptable. So I'm proud to proclaim today Equal Pay Day in Vermont, and also to launch the Vermont Equal Pay Compact. The Equal Pay Compact aims to boost wages for Vermont women, improve economic security for women and their families, and make progress towards an overdue right of equal pay for women in this state. It's a voluntary agreement in which empowers employers to take a pledge to take steps to eliminate the wage gap in Vermont, and requires signing employers to commit to at least 3 concept steps to help close the wage gap for men and women. I'm incredibly proud to announce that the state of Vermont is the first employer to sign this compact. And I'm proud to be joined by other Vermont employers today who are leading this effort and doing the right thing to encourage solving this problem. When women succeed in Vermont, Vermont succeeds. And it's extraordinary that we sit here in the 21st century with a pay disparity based on gender. I often ask the question, as a man, if the pay gap were just the opposite, and men in Vermont made 83 cents for every dollar that a woman makes, would we have solved the problem yet? And I'll leave the answer to all of you. In addition to ensuring that we get equal pay, it's also important to ask the question, what is it in the workforce that sometimes holds women particularly back? And we all know that one of the things that holds women back in Vermont is the fact that when a family member gets sick, or when they get sick, they are often unable to go home from work, therefore endangering other Vermonters, or take care of a sick child when that child needs them. It jeopardizes their job. It holds back their ability to succeed in the workforce. So I just want to tell you how encouraged I am by the Earned Sick Leave bill that is currently being worked on in the General Affairs Committee under the chairmanship of Helen Head, and the good work of that committee, some members who left the committee to come join us today for this press conference. I've always said that it makes sense for Vermont to have an earned sick leave bill. It makes sense to remove the obstacles that allow women not only to get fair pay, but to get into the workforce and succeed. And I've always said the devil's in the details. I'm going to let them talk a little bit about the bill that they're working on, but their bill is headed in the right direction. And I really want to see this bill become law in Vermont. The good news about this bill is that it basically doesn't require employers who are doing the right thing with giving their employees sick leave when they're sick, the ability to continue to implement those policies without being affected by new legislation. In other words, if you're already meeting the standard, it doesn't require additional burden upon you. It does say to the employers who don't recognize the necessity the imperative, the basic right, to let someone go home when they're desperately sick or take care of a child who's desperately sick, you got to fix it. You got to come up with a sensible policy that allows this basic dignity in the workforce.
So I want to describe a couple of the high-level ideas behind the bill, but I also want to reiterate that where this bill is now, I think, is a reflection of some common sense and some pragmatic thinking that involved many stakeholder conversations with the business community, with the advocate community, within the legislature, as we looked for a path that set an appropriate balancing act between the needs of all Vermonters to have this important benefit and the needs of the business community to have predictability, adaptability, and some understanding of the very real challenges that business face in implementing a new directive from the state. And so, to reiterate, where that led was to this notion of this universal, modest, and incremental approach. And it's built upon the foundation of this underlying principle that long-term employees add value to businesses, and that the long-term relationship and their shared commitments to each other are the heart of where the business community and sort of the quality of life of Vermont citizens interact and intersect. And so we focus there. We look for a way of articulating the value that those long-term employees have, whether they're part-time or full-time. There are a couple of tests for how people kind of get into the process of this bill, but that's the underlying principle behind it. And I want to start off by something that the governor mentioned, and I appreciate him raising this issue, which is that there is an equivalency test within the bill, which means if you already offer some sort of plan that includes all of the substantive requirements of the bill, then you don't have to do anything. And I think what I have been hearing in the last few weeks, many of the emails that I've received have said, I have this policy and why do I have to change? And the answer is that you probably don't, in fact. And so for many Vermont businesses, we are affirming what you are currently doing, and we're trying to address our attention to the slice of the employer population that hasn't yet found a way to offer this benefit. Another key issue was that we wanted to recognize that the beginning of a relationship between an employee and an employer, sometimes that takes time to understand whether that employee is going to be offering value long term, whether it's the right fit for the employee to be at that firm, that business, and that there was reason to have a threshold of hours worked that would give everybody an opportunity to sort of vet each other. That standard was set at 1,400 hours in the current draft, which works out to about 8 months of full-time work or 1 year, whichever comes first. So if you're a long-term part-time employee, this is where you can see the way that the bill recognizes the contribution that long-term part-time employees offer to businesses is by the 1 year standard, and it also allows, the 1,400 hours allows for a thorough vetting by both employee and employer. We do not cover temporary and seasonal workers, and there are some specifics around that of who it meets the test of a temporary or seasonal worker. And then the incremental approach that I spoke of earlier is that the first 2 years of the implementation of the law, the maximum days would be 3 days or 24 hours for the first 2 years of implementation. And after that, the standard would rise to 5 days or 40 hours. And then also within the bill are some possible paths that businesses can take that are designed to try to minimize the reporting and paperwork requirements of this bill. We definitely want this to be something that is easy for businesses to implement and consistent with a real vision of shared prosperity for all Vermonters.
I, Peter Shumlin, Governor, do hereby proclaim April 14, 2015 as Equal Pay Day in Vermont. Gun signed, sealed, and delivered. And, we'd be happy to take questions on either of these two efforts, if you wish. If you don't,
Last year you said paid sick days didn't have momentum, wasn't feasible because it hasn't, doesn't have the foothold that minimum wage has over the years. What's changed?
well, it's always more difficult to do something that's never been done than has been done before. And as you know, we've been dealing with minimum wage issues not only in Vermont but across the country since, I want to say, back to at least, what was it, the 1930s. Thank you. So, listen, this is what's changed. As was so aptly expressed by Tristan and Sarah, the legislature has joined us in listening to both business and to folks who are struggling for a fair bill. And they've come up with some really great ideas that allow us to do this in a way that doesn't impose any burden on most Vermont businesses who are doing the right thing, but addresses the issue, which is it's unfair that we ask people who are really sick to go to work when none of us in the public want them preparing our food, doing all the things that they do when they're sick, because it hurts us all. Or it's unfair to ask mostly women who care for children, when you have a sick child, you lose your job if you go and care to that sick child. So this is an important issue. I was really encouraged by the work that the House Committee is doing, and I'm saying on Equal Pay Day, for the sake of all Vermonters, and a disproportionate share happen to be women, let's get this done. Let's come up with a logical bill that works for Vermont.
Do we know how many people and businesses this would potentially affect?
Well, I'm going to turn it over to the folks who are taking testimony on that one.
I think that
Come
the
on up to
estimate
the
is around
mic so
60.
they'll get very
The estimate is around 60,000 Vermonters, and the Department of Labor could probably clarify a little bit more, but it's in that range, and it primarily falls into a couple of sectors. The service and hospitality retail sectors are where the majority of those people work.
So how many, obviously that's a set amount of sectors, but how many businesses are we talking?
I'm trying to remember.
Should we turn over to the Secretary, the Commissioner?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the Commissioner of Labor to see if I'm not sure that we've been able to exactly figure out how many businesses, I mean, will fall in or out as both the thresholds have moved around a little bit as the bill's been going through the House, but also in terms of the data that the DOL has, it's very hard to pinpoint that at this point. So we've been focusing on the total number of Vermonters and knowing that if we have a bill that targets the areas where there are gaps, that will probably hit most of them, or many of them.
So 60,000 who do not now have any paid time off would qualify under this rule?
So it's 60,000 is the pool that roughly that exists that don't have any benefit. Not all of those will get caught in the bill just because of the temporary and seasonal workers that are carved out and sort of the natural churn that happens within businesses before people reach the 1,400 hours. But we do believe that the population of long-term part-time employees and long-term employees will be caught, and that's a substantial number of people in that pool.
And is there any protection for the employee who requests the benefit from retaliation?
So there, within, I think this is a good question for the Commissioner, actually. I don't want to step on her toes.
Take it away. Thank you, Tristan. Annie?
Hi. Yes, the bill provides for enforcement by the Vermont Department of Labor if an employee contacts us to advise that they have been attempting to use the benefit and then the employer retaliates for their contact with the Department of Labor, they have protections under our enforcement actions.
They have to contact your department?
They have to have contacted the Department of Labor.
What's the penalty?
The penalty would be the same as it would be under other provisions of the law, where basically we can review the facts and make it I think it's an up to $5,000 penalty.
So is this as strong? It doesn't sound like it's as strong as the quote-unquote Sodexo bill that the Senate turned down last week.
I think I actually would want to say that it provides some of the protections, but no, we're not looking at issues of, this bill does not include complaints of discrimination. It really is focusing on a retaliation complaint to the department.
Governor, is it fair to say that one difference between last year and this year is that last year there was a big minimum wage bill,
and that maybe there just wasn't the appetite for a second bill that was going to
No, I think it's important to know that the substance of the bill was very different last year, and that the two legislators who just spoke to this bill opposed this bill last year as folks who are small business owners. So what has happened is exactly what I said I hoped would happen. We've brought folks together to take on an issue that we all agree is a problem, and said, how can we work constructively to come up with a bill that works for business and works for Vermonters? And the reason I think that Sarah and Tristan support this bill and didn't support last year's is that this one is a sensible approach that solves a problem without impacting most Vermont businesses who are doing the right thing already.
But in plain English, is it that you're excluding seasonal and temporary folks? Is that what's triggered your support?
No, it's also that two things. Obviously, seasonal and temporary are left out, but the bigger piece is that for the vast majority of businesses who are already doing the right thing, they're not required to change anything. That's different.
So they wouldn't have to, there wouldn't be an administrative burden if they already
None
meet this?
whatsoever.
They wouldn't have to certify
No.
that they...
There would be no administrative burden. My understanding of the bill that they're working on now is, you know, if you are an employee who feels like the policies aren't being implemented as they're advertised, you have the ability to go forth and say, hey, we've got a problem here. But really, for the vast majority of employers in Vermont who already have plenty of burden on them trying to make their product and create jobs, this has absolutely no effect on them. So I think it's a much narrower, more thoughtful bill. And sometimes when you just say, hey, you know, we've all got an idea that a problem that's got to be fixed. I don't think there are very many Vermonters who say, it's really great to be in a state where if you're really sick, you go to work, and if you don't go to work, you lose your job. I don't think there's very many Vermonters who say, you know, if your child is really ill, mom or dad should lose their job if they go pick them up from school, get them home, and take care of them. But the problem with last year's bill is it just hadn't been thought out. And this one, I think the committee is making great progress, heading in the right direction.
So is it fair to say that the burden is on the employee then? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
I think it's fair to say that it's the burden of responsibility is on the employer to have a smart policy. Most Vermont employers already do. Mm-hmm. If you don't, join up. And if there's a problem, employees will certainly have the authority to deal with it and a process by which it will be dealt with.
So
You said the state was the first one to sign on and about closing the gap. I was wondering your reaction to the Liquor Control Department. They seem to be closing the gap to unauthorized, undocumented overtime. Were they just ahead of you a little bit, or what?
Listen, I was surprised by the revelations of the way they were dealing with overtime at the Department of Liquor. I was concerned for obvious reasons. And I'm grateful that we've imposed policies back in January that don't allow folks to implement policies like that. And I expect that the Department of Liquor will be looking at those policies and trying to come up with better ways to deal with this going forward.
How many other departments had something like that you didn't have to document any overtime, you just got carte blanche to put in overtime on your time sheet?
Let me put it this way. As soon as I learned that there was a discrepancy among departments in the way that they're dealing with overtime, we issued the directive. If state government hasn't been clear in the past, and as you pointed out, this has been going on, the liquor, particular one that you cited, I believe this policy has been in place since Governor Dean, Governor Douglas, and Governor Shumlin. When we figured out that there was ambiguity about how these issues should be dealt with, we dealt with it. I should also make the point that, as you know, the liquor department is run by the commissioner and governed by an independent board, and we're hoping that they take a hard look at this.
Governor, the Agency of Education has shifted its stance on H361, which is one of the consolidation bill, essentially. They're now saying maybe not so much on the mandatory consolidation. What have your conversations been like with Secretary Holcomb regarding that shift in position?
Well, I don't think we're shifting position. Let me be clear. If you go back and listen to my speech in January, I outlined a plan to address the concerns that Vermonters have, where school spending is rising faster than it can be sustained, where we've gone from 120,000 students down to 78,000, and we're continuing to drop going forward, and where we must have a process when we leave this building, a bill that helps communities develop a partnership with the state of Vermont to look at what will solve their challenges, either administratively or in terms of the number of students they have in their school, to make sure that we have a more rational school system going forward. And I think the House has done a great job of passing a bill that incorporates many of my ideas, some of their own. I think the Senate's now going to take testimony on what's the best course of action. What I want to get is a bill that works for Vermont, and I think we will.
But Friday, as reported, I believe, by Vermont Digger, Mr. Talbot said, we're no longer looking for the mandatory 1,100 person school district, which is something that the Secretary and others representing the administration have been adamant in support of before. So you don't see that as a shift in position?
Well, I've been very clear about my view of how we should move forward on this, and you can go read my speech. That hasn't shifted. I've also been very clear that the House did an extraordinary job of incorporating many of my ideas and incorporating some of their own. It's not going to be all my way, and it shouldn't be. At the end, it's important that the House and the Senate and the Governor come together with a bill that solves the big problem that Vermont's facing, which is we're spending money on schools faster than we can earn it. Our students continue to go down, and I said in my speech, just want to remind you of this, at some point, after we work together to come up with not a one-size-fits-all, but every community has a different solution because that's what's right for them, someone has to have the ability eventually to say, we got to help you, you got orphaned, or we got to make sure that there's someone, either the state board or the commissioner, the secretary, who has the ability to say, you know, this has got to happen in the best interest of kids and in the best interest of Vermont. So I don't think we're far apart, and I think we'll come up with a smart bill.
But certainly your secretary and other administration officials speak for you in the interim between your speech and some of the committee testimony that has since happened. I mean, they're not just firing from the hip here.
I think that we're headed in the right direction on making progress on school governance and school quality in ways that we haven't seen in a long time in this building. And we're not going to all agree on every single piece. I think that we agree on a lot more than we disagree about, and I look forward to getting all the parties together to come up with a bill
Do you
that
support
works.
mandates for school consolidation as described by Governor? The 1,100 students in an integrated education system, do you support mandates for that?
I support the direction of the House of moving to K through 12 school districts. That makes good common sense. The question is, how do we get there, and how do we do it in a way that meets the needs of every community in Vermont? As I've said many times before, I believe that by partnering with local communities, which we think we failed to do adequately in the past, and showing them the data, which is exactly what the Secretary of Education has been doing, meeting with school boards and saying, you know, particularly starting with the smaller school districts that are losing kids, if you think you've got a challenge now, this is where you're going to be in 5 years, this is where you'll be in 10 years, your property taxes, if you don't change anything, are going to be out of sight as you continue to lose students. And we want to partner with you and change some of the things in the school funding formula that the House changed to make sure that we all together solve this problem so that we don't lose school quality, which we're losing, or hurting kids, and so that property taxes don't continue to go up faster than can be paid. So this isn't a new position. It's what I believe. It's what the Secretary believes. I think it's what the House and the Senate believe, and we got to get a bill that makes sense.
I'm confused. Is that a no on mandates?
I don't think that, I think that, as you know, one person's mandate is another person's partnership. Let's figure out what the bill says in the end before we start trying to draw lines of who's disagreeing with whom.
Governor, you've been saying for a while that Vermont has more of a spending problem than a revenue problem, and now PA, our Public Assets Institute, is trumpeting this new analysis from Joint Fiscal Office talking about how state spending is actually smaller as a proportion of gross state product than it was.
Well, so this is where we fundamentally disagree. There's a difference between gross state product and gross state income. And if you look at gross state income, that's the money that Vermonters have in their pockets, which is what I hope the legislature and the governor should be focused on. We have a spending problem that needs to be fixed.
So you don't think gross state product is a good measure at all in this?
We've never used it before for these purposes that I'm aware of. Listen, when I go out and talk to Vermonters, they say to me, I'm working hard, middle-class Vermonters. I'm playing by the rules. This is true not just Vermont, across America. The wage gap has never been greater, and when my bills come in, I don't have more money to pay them than I had last year or the year before, but I keep reading about this economic recovery. And our job is to make Vermont's economy work for every single Vermonter. It's not working well enough for the middle class. It's not working well enough for low-income Vermonters. And they are concerned about their incomes. That should be the measure by which we make our judgments. How much money do Vermonters have in their pockets? If you use that number, we are spending faster than can be sustained. And that's why I proposed the budget that I did, which was a 1.9% increase over the budget that was passed last year before we started our rescission process.
Has your thinking changed at all on the advisability of a state carbon tax?
My position hasn't changed in the respect that, as you know, the faster we can get off oil, coal, and save our planet from total destruction, the better off we're going to be. We all know that we're a little teeny state, and we'd be much better off working in a regional partnership where we don't have a teeny little state without borders trying to do something that we should all be doing together.
But there's no upside, in your view, to the potential magnet to the state for, the appeal of having a cleaner energy system and.
Well, that's why I'm working so hard to do all the other things that we're doing. And listen, I'm getting a lot of heat because we're building so many solar panels so fast. We've got 8 times the number of solar panels we had in the state. I think it's 8 times than when I became governor. We've got wind turbines up on the mountains. We should. I fully support the work that Efficiency Vermont is doing, trying to get us to use these resources. The energy bill that's going to this building right now, I know it's not easy to write about, but that bill is going to take us to the next step of being able to totally reinvent our business model for our utilities. They're going to literally be in a business of coming into your home, older home, figuring out with on-bill financing how to rip out your doors and windows and replace them with efficient doors and windows, blow as much cellulose into that building as they can, put solar panels on your roof and a heat pump in your basement, and have you integrate with your neighbors to do energy using a lot less of it, saving you money, creating jobs, and changing the business model of the industry where it used to be how much juice can we get from out there somewhere, send it in poles and wires, and sell as much quantity as we can. This is revolutionary. So all I'm saying is there are many tools that we're going to need to use together. The carbon tax works if you have a group of states working together to solve the problem.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Go get them.
Watch the governor's press conference each week at this time here on Vermont PBS World. You can also log on and see previous press conferences at our website, vermontpbs.org.